Hello world, welcome to the Pocket Gamer podcast with your hosts, me, Brian Baglow, and our doyen of data, Miss Peggy Salz. And it's going to be a data-centric episode, Peggy, I believe.
It is. I'm going to geek out. I'm going to geek out a little bit, Brian, because I love this
You
kind
and
of
me
stuff.
both.
Because you can
Yes.
only build a business if you're not blind, and you're not blind when you have data to guide you. Yes, you could always say which data, but we have special data because we have it in a way from the source, right? Because I am thrilled to welcome a man who's got a great nickname. I heard it. I was at Gamescom. They called him out. Oh, hey, it's the Insights guy. So he is the Insights guy. He is the data guru, and he has a knack for turning numbers into narratives, which we're going to have as well. So let's welcome him, Mariusz Gąsiewski, the Central Eastern Europe mobile gaming and apps lead at Google. So when I said the source, Brian, I meant it.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
Mariusz, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much for joining us.
So you've been with Google since 2007. That's a long time. That's a long time to get deep into the data, which you are doing. You're constantly uncovering trends around the market. But speaking of numbers, right? They don't just play in your professional life. And you'll appreciate this as well, Brian. You've got a big family in your own way, between children and pets. Mariusz is able to has that life balance, right? That professional work-life balance. He is also the father of 5 children, which is unique in our industry.
And so how do you manage to balance such a huge data-driven career and with such, deep insight with the dynamics of such a big family?
I think it's on one side is the topic of the time. It's like I think whatever time you would have, it will be almost not enough. So that's like I think you need to get used and live like working, having not enough time on one side, and then I think on the other hand, trying sometimes to do the trade-offs. Sometimes you need to work a little bit differently. So, for example, like even when I work with the data, it often happens for me that the most advanced types of like analysis I'm doing, for example, almost in the night once the children are like in the bed and I have full peace at home. So I think again it requires a lot of adjustment. I think again it's challenging to have a big family, but it's like amazing as well. Yeah, so it's kind of this uh, uh, this combination of both. Yes, so I think again it's not common in our industry, but I think it shows that it's doable as well. Yeah.
Clearly, you understand challenges, personal, professional, managing life's many challenges, also managing the data that we're going to get to. And I thought, keeping with this numbers thing, so yes, let's limit ourselves. 3 is the magic number. 3 is what we're going to do. We're going to do genres, geo, and growth, because I love alliteration too. It's
Yes.
that little bit of journalistic joy that I get, right? A little bit of fun. So we'll start with genres, because on your blog and your recent first half of the year report, you talk about significant growth in specific genres. And you'll remember this, Brian, because when we had at the time Data AI, now it's Sensor Tower, they pointed out a similar point. It's strategy, it's action, puzzle, casual. But you have data that shows that they're outperforming, in particular on iOS, outperforming Android, therefore, in the process. What is the driver, do you think, behind this, Mariusz?
If we look at the market, it's growing more by the revenue by now downloads. So it's more like we are growing by the growing monetization, by improving the adding some incremental revenue, which means that of course there's really high focus how to actually make more value every download. And again, it goes in two sides. Either on one side we have casual user, how to actually make him stay longer in the game, and that's usually the case with those casual genres where we even, for example, with Match 3, it started from very simple games and then it was more and more meta and more like very much more complex gameplay. Then on the other side, like coming from the genres like strategy, when there was very high value per user, but there was very small potential number of users. Yeah, and by opening this door to much easier experience and then trying to to add this more and more user experience step by step, that actually, of course, it's expanding the market heavily. That's why if we look about the genre, if we look about iOS, of course, what was happening is that in general, this IDFA topic added a lot of changes on the challenges on the growth side. So that's why even if we look at the data, for example, for 2022, 2023, even especially beginning of the year, most of the marketing, for example, paid marketing in general in iOS was happening mostly in US or in very, very big markets. So that's why actually, even if you look at very recent data on iOS, something that was main driver of this iOS market US is not really anymore, because we see that actually that strong growth of iOS is coming from markets like UK, like even Asian markets like Malaysia, Thailand, even Poland, for example, has a very strong, more than 20% year-over-year growth rate in terms of revenue on iOS and gaming. Yeah, so I think that was combination of both sides. Yeah, on one side, this trend on the genre side, but then on the other side, a lot of changes in terms of how actually much more experience in terms of iOS marketing was able to be driven on the market versus when this IDFA topic was just starting, and a lot of companies were just afraid doing any bigger user acquisition in that space.
I remember because a lot of budget got shifted to Android at that time as well.
Peggy, yeah, that's actually a really good point, because that actually created pretty strong competition on Android side. Yeah, because like when those the budgets were shifting more to Android side, then actually the markets like US became extremely competitive on the Android side. Yeah, so that's why actually when a lot of companies were looking for incremental, that they were starting to experiment more and more with iOS as well, because even if it was more challenging, then on the other side there were sometimes less players competing for the same user, especially on the paid marketing.
So given these shifts, how can developers adjust their strategies to kind of maximize the opportunities in these genres? And more to the point, should they? Is this something that you think is a passing phase, or is this our new reality?
So that's kind of the new reality we see. If we even look at, for example, there are really big shifts, for example, in hyper casual. That exactly it's moving towards this more like hybrid casual games that are actually users can play for longer. And part of that really big part of this hybridization is, for example, like looking for additional business models, like trying, for example, for the players who have the in-app purchases to maybe add some ads for like some of the users, or on the other side, even if the game is like in-app focus, then adding some more ads. Yeah, because if we look, for example, at in-app advertising and in-app advertising and ads markets actually growing faster than in-app purchases. Yeah, so that's why actually it's I think big opportunity, especially for smaller players, where if they like focus on that more, then actually can get additional revenue.
So that's fascinating, Mariusz, and it kind of corresponds with what we've heard from so many of the guests that we've had on the podcast over the last several months, which is there's no one size fits all anymore. Every game is different, every region is different. But again, I'm going to come back to is this the new paradigm? Is this how it is now, or do you think this is something that might revert back to maybe the earlier phase where in-app purchases were kind of the primary driver of revenue?
I think they are still really like big part, and I think they will, like in many genres, they are still will be like the main source of their revenue. Like, again, if we look at genres like strategy, role playing, so in those genres that are still very often actually they are the biggest like gaming genres, like in-app purchases really either dominate or almost only existing. But of course, on the other side, if we look at the growth of the revenue, that is actually in general higher than in emerging markets than in tier one markets. Those are the markets where very often this advertising side is like 3 sometimes 5 times bigger than in-app purchases. Yeah, so that's why like typical way to grow the revenue once you are more and more present in those markets, really to put more attention, for example, to ads. Yeah, sometimes it's coming from the specific types of the games. Yeah, because again, let's see if we have some countries like India, yeah, where, for example, the research shows that what is interesting, people, if they play games, in some way they are feeling guilty because they are feeling that they are wasting the time. So then they are feeling better. They are feeling better if they have the feeling they are learning something. So that's why, for example, for that reason, games like puzzle or like logic games, they perform better in those in that country. And because they are very ads-driven games, then by definition, those 2 points are kind of combined together.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's there is there are a number of countries around the world where fun is still seen as a four-letter word, and just merely having fun is somehow uh, beneath many people. So I take your point entirely.
Yeah, I think like if we look at the like top 100 games by revenue, still like the biggest focus for them would be in-app revenue. Yeah, and it's now, and that's rather the future as well. But like the more we go down the line, the more usually focus I see on the ad side, because usually it's easier to add some incremental revenue from just maybe more expansion to those emerging markets.
And I want to kind of pick up on that and actually look at some of these regions because, as Peggy said at the top of the show, we're going to talk about genres and then geos. And so when we look at some of the different regions around the world and things like the decline in gaming revenue from tier one markets like the US, where are you seeing the growth? And what are you seeing studios doing to respond to this and changing strategy to tap into these new opportunities?
So like what we see in general, like over the last month, even those smaller tier one markets were growing faster
Hmm.
than, for example, in US. Because like even in
Hmm.
tier one markets, you have markets like UK, for example, Germany, where actually the revenue is growing pretty nice. Yeah, so that's one part of the story. Then second part of the story, of course, are those emerging markets. So we talk about like countries exactly like Brazil, Malaysia, of course, like Arabic markets like Arab Emirates or like Saudi Arabia. Those actually are bringing more and more incremental revenue, and still, of course, they're much smaller than US. I just look just recently comparing the percentage of the revenue coming from countries like outside of top 10
Hmm.
between beginning of the year and now, and increased by 2 percentage points. Yeah, so again we see that happening already. Of course, it's still not big scale, but I think especially from the perspective of smaller developers that are looking for these
Hmm.
ways to grow and not necessarily fight against the biggest ones, that's actually interesting opportunity. Especially now, I think the technology development of AI makes much easier topics that were extremely challenging in the past, like localization, good translation, adjustment
Hmm.
of the game, like changing the game based on the specific user's behavior, changing the game based on the specific path of
Hmm.
the users.
We talk about what AI does, but it also, as you point out, it makes it yeah, it's easier to localize and pick up on this incremental revenue. Um, how should gaming companies be balancing that? Because they want to be strong local, but they also want to explore the new markets.
Depending on your runway and how much money you have on the bank account, either you can choose like bigger and more challenging battles or like smaller ones. Yeah, so of course, uh, if you cannot really plan for the next 15 months or like 2 years, because at the end of the day that's the life, and you rather need to focus on those more like short term or maximum middle term improvements, then of course focusing on those markets that pretty well already. So for example, if let's see Poland on the market, and then maybe adding the markets that are actually in many cases similar but still growing. Let's see, Romania, for example, or like Czechia, can be really interesting in the same way in Southeast Asia, yeah, like Thailand, or Malaysia, or specific segment in the game, like localization, or like changing the behavior of the game. And again, even recent advancement in the tools are helping with that. Even, for example, in the Play console, just recently were added some additional tools that help to localize, for example, listings, or they help to create better description exactly based on AI. So you can choose even very simple strategies to improve your current baseline. Or on the other side, it used to be known that strategy games are played by the users who are very deep into the game. They play many years, many hours per day, but there is very small percentage of them. Yeah, but we see more and more those games that actually got the idea. Okay, not necessarily. Maybe if we try to have this beginning of the game easier, maybe we extend the approach toward other countries that were not seen really important for that genre, because no one really thought about that, because everyone had the idea that okay, it's mostly Asian people, for example, who play the strategy game, but not necessarily is the true if you have some time and resources to think about upfront what can be really in the future.
I mean, that's interesting. I was just talking to someone who's going to be on our show, Brian, and he was telling me that hardcore strategy, but they were just playing a little bit with AI and had some time and thought, anime, why not try that, right? As part of the ad creative. And it actually works. And now they're bringing in a whole different audience. So there's a lot of interesting creative opportunity. And you, as a creative person, you'll appreciate that. There's a good side to this.
Yeah, hugely, hugely. And this is one of the things that I don't think people outside the mobile world, the mobile games world, necessarily appreciate, which is the audience is so vast and phones are in every single purse and pocket that you have the opportunity to get games in front of people who would never, buy a console or pick up a joystick, and finding ways to tap into those audiences is actually incredibly creative, incredibly joyful, and it's putting games in the hands of people who would not have picked them up otherwise. It just requires a completely different and, as you just said, Peggy, creative approach to your user acquisition.
Yeah, and I think in a little bit different approach towards the risk, yeah, because at the end of the day, how you usually now you could see how those games are created are actually done in two different ways. The first one, more like, I think, something that is more well known when you look at the different tools like Data AI, or maybe Sensor Tower, or like different available tools, trying to understand what audiences are playing specific types of the games, and you are just trying to make it better. The other way is you are like you start to ask questions. Okay, what are the motivations behind that playing? What are other maybe types of the games that can fulfill the same motivations? If the people are not playing specific types of the games, why it's happening? And of course, that second way is just more challenging, is harder, very often requires faster iteration, very often requires bigger resources as well, and of course much braver approach towards the risk.
Well, that's why we have you here, Mariusz, because you're going to bring us the data that's going to shape that. I just want to have a quick follow-up on Geos before we move on to the next area. And that is, you made it very clear. It's either sort of the neighboring countries to the markets or it's the ones that we all know about. We're hearing so much about MENA. We're hearing so much about growth in Southeast Asia. So do you have some insights you could share about not only where the growth is, but where it's also affordable for our audience?
When we look at the resources for the indie, we do not need to think only about, okay, it's affordable only to create the game, but how actually I will promote it, because it can happen that, for example, in those very well targeted campaigns that are, for example, focused on potential payers, the cost of CPI in US can be up to like $40 USD, for example, per user. Yeah, so So that's actually is big, of course, barrier in the growth. And exactly, it's coming to your question, Peggy. It's like, it's a little bit case what battle I can play and what battle I can really challenge having my resources. For example, let's see in the strategy. Actually, very interesting market for the strategies. For example, Vietnam. It's one of the top markets for the genre, because it's extremely popular genre in that market. Because even if once the people started gaming there, they started to gaming from the internet cafes, and by definition from the beginning they got used to from player to player games. Even if you see some ads from those regions, of course, if we talk about like casual genres, we see very interesting growth from, for example, Latin markets. Of course, if we talk about Europe, I was mentioning Poland a few times, because exactly in revenue per download, in the monetization in the recent years, it's actually moved very significantly from very average market to actually pretty significant in many genres. Of course, I think it's still not there yet, but we see some influence even coming from African markets, Nigeria again. Not very strong in terms of monetization, but if someone is actually monetizing the game by ads, then we see that very often in those emerging markets, the ratio of the acquisition of the user versus the eCPM from that user is actually very often better than in tier one markets. So that means that very often, for example, for the players that have ad monetized games, even that Nigeria, it happens that actually is quite important market. And then of course it's even deeper around markets like India, because again, people got used some time ago that if you create the content for India, you were doing in English. Then just recently there you had much more content in Hindi, but if you look at the India, you have actually a few very big languages that are kind of popular in different markets, Telugu, so that are very often by the percentage versus the percentage of the middle class. Like Telugu, for example, is actually has much higher percentage of the middle class versus the percentage of the population in the total. That's why even a lot of, for example, movies in India is done in either Hindi or Telugu. That means that finally, if you are starting to go deeper with the specific market, I see more and more actually players thinking about, okay, maybe not only localize for Hindi, but maybe I will localize, for example, for Telugu, my app and my marketing.
And I think for me, this is one of the key things, Mariusz, which is that, there's, again, it's this individual games, individual markets, individual genres, localization, and so on. You cannot just put it out and hope for the best anymore. You have to be able to understand your data. You have to be able to react to that data, and react appropriately, because otherwise you are just taking chances that you don't need to. But it all comes back to knowing your numbers.
Exactly, because it's I think it's I think the main case and the really important to understand the gaming is high risk, high reward business. So that is actually really risk is very high, but reward is very high as well, which means it's not really the topic for hobbies anymore. So it's really serious, because even if you are not serious, the other are very serious, and you are actually competing with them. So finally, this professionalization that happens on the product side, on the marketing side, that start actually quite many years ago, and over the last years was happening at first in tier one markets. Then we see actually more and more happening even in the emerging markets. So even if we're talking about those emerging markets, very often it was very easy to enter those markets like five years ago, because you could be only one of the first players that you localize that game pretty well for that market. But even that is not really the case anymore, because whatever game you take, it's high chance that you will find quite good number of competitors doing that pretty well already for that specific market.
So we covered geo. Now we're going to go to the third G, growth. And you saw exactly the reverse of that because you saw a decline. You saw a sharp decline of revenue in June. And that took many by surprise. But then again, how dramatic? Because, summer is always that thing where people aren't really doing what they usually do, which would be play games. They're outside. So maybe that's part of it, maybe a little seasonality. But how dramatic? What's the drop? What's the driver?
June is like kind of double-digit decline, like in some markets, for example, like in US. Those markets that were growing very healthy, like for example in US, they started to grow at much lower rate in the last months, especially in this June. But again, I think it started even from the beginning of the year. So that means exactly what we discussed, that it should give even more motivation to look at, okay, what are my potential growth rate drivers for my game beyond just those top markets. I think August and September will be like really interesting to see. Still, like the whole year, like if we combine it, still kind of positive because it gives like around 3-4% year-over-year growth rate. So still we are kind of positive with a little bit better situation on iOS than Android. Especially on the revenue side, so still growth there is, but again, I think it shows that industry cannot grow forever. Yeah, so it's like there is specific on one side a little bit competition between the apps in terms of revenue, because we see more and more, for example, revenue happening on apps as well, because more and more apps is adding some subscription or some additional business models that are competing in general with the money that we spend the internet. Then of course I think it even adds this more discussion around how to actually look for this additional growth driver just beyond this in-app revenue, because again it got to the specific point and it's huge business, bigger than cinema, bigger like many other verticals, but it's not growing as far as it used to be, which means that exactly is forcing towards this, maybe how to really add some more revenue from ads, maybe how to try to leverage more platforms for the gaming company. Yeah, because if we have strong IP, for example, on mobile, we could leverage that on the games for PC on console. And actually, it seems from the market that that's exactly how market is actually moving towards on both sides. Yes, or from PC console to mobile, and then from mobile to PC and console. Then of course, like there is discussion maybe, and we see that as well, how to actually create this gaming as part of the bigger entertainment industry, like some potential revenue from swags, from like leveraging the IP that we created. And I think that actually creates exactly much bigger question, how actually the industry can grow, not just basing on in-app revenue that is not growing as it used to be.
I'm just thinking, Brian, and it's really catching on, is the discussion that we had, for example, with coup apps, right? And having a comic was a way of, again, being in a different platform. So there's different platforms, there's different approaches. Where do you see the opportunities, Mariusz? Because you talked about platforms, so mobile, console, mobile, maybe alternative stores, I don't know, maybe media. We've got our example of a comic book for a game. Where do you see it?
Actually is good points. Yes, so like for example, those alternative stores and like web shops. Yeah, I think there is actually getting hot topics, especially in the core genres. Yeah, when like significant revenue comes from the like the users that you have for a long time already. Yeah, so they're really loyal. So maybe you could actually try to monetize them a little bit differently and better, having very strong relationship with them. Then I think again it's part of this bigger discussion around the IP, how to actually try to create something that is significant, that can be utilized in longer way, either by, for example, building the games that have some specific IP already, so or like how to actually, for example, use the IP to decrease the cost of acquisition because people know that IP. So then they recall to the ads will be better. So finally, then you will have cheaper cost of acquisition versus versus competition. And then I think that the platforms that we discuss is something that again happens maybe with the some kind of asterisk that I think is that in general it seems to me the growth of the content coming to the PC and console is even stronger than on mobile, because on mobile at specific point like companies realize that actually it's very hard to build new games. So then I think that growth of new games, even quite strong, kind of decline. So more and more players try to extend the life of the game, add more live ops, like trying to actually add more extension of the current game rather to create new one, versus on the PC and console, where at specific point I think it became kind of something known on the market, or like at least understood on the market, and like a lot of people started to think that that PC market and console market is easier than mobile. Then I started to see that actually many studios started to create much more PC and console games than in the past. And actually I remember that I was like helping with this kind of gaming accelerator in Cyprus. There was quite a few submissions from indies, and I think like more like than 70% of them were for like PC console games. Yeah. So, and again, all of them, they have projection to be built in like 12 to 15 months. So I think that means that especially among the smaller players, this growth of this content for PC and console is actually really strong, which means that actually will increase the competition in that space quite heavily. Versus if we look at the data, I think like top top 40 games is like responsible for like 60% of the playtime on like PC and console. Yeah, so
It really highlights something that I think is becoming ever more, polarized in the games world, which is that so many developers have the technical and creative skills to make something, but this whole publishing side of things, choosing a monetization model, choosing your business models, user acquisition, all of the things which are your primary challenges on the app stores where you're competing against, the Spotifys and the Facebooks and the Twitters or X's of the world, go away if you decide to work on PC. And it's premium content, money up front. If your player doesn't like the game, you don't have to care. And so it's becoming a choice, but I don't think it's necessarily an informed choice. I think it's because for a lot of people who are coming through, the games courses at the various universities and colleges around the world, they're being taught how to make a thing. They're not being taught how to monetize or sell the thing.
I think like part of the case is that overall on the mobile space we have much more data available. So that's the reason why I think some trends are understood a little bit better and broader. Then on the other hand, I think there are specific even communities inside the mobile space, like really huge growth community, like, and we could see it exactly in Gamescom when we're on different like parties, like exactly people working with data from like with the growth from top gaming companies and top gaming indies, where actually it's really huge crowd exchanging the knowledge like freely between each other. So I think in this case this pool of that knowledge is pretty strong. That creates a little bit sometimes more innovation in that space. I think in the PC and console, it used to be only about product. And just recently, I think it's more and more about marketing as well. Yes, so I think that's a little bit big thing that is coming a little bit from mobile to the PC and console space, and that's why probably like a lot of companies will face bigger and bigger competition, because something that was like obvious and common in mobile, I think will face more and more in the PC and console space as well.
And they come together. I mean, that magic happens, and we saw that also as well at Gamescom, which was very dominated by, PC and console, is that when you understand marketing, then you can create a better product. It's not isolated, and it was never isolated, but now sort of forced to come together more and more, which is fascinating that they have to work together.
Exactly, and I think because those projects became bigger and bigger, which means it creates like on one side business risk, because it's just specific cost that not necessarily will be paying off. Then I think there is even more motivation to think about this PC and console development more in the phases, like in the way it is in the mobile, yeah, when like it's obvious now that you start from this day one retention, like then you look at the first metrics, then based on that you decide if you proceed with the game or not. And I think it's starting on the PC and console space as well, yeah. Not exactly from those metrics, because a little bit different ones exist, and there is again a little bit less possibilities. That creates quite interesting new wave of competition, because the length of the lifetime of the product will be longer, which means that you will be even competing more, not only with the new releasing games, but with the games that were released kind of even long time ago, and still they're trying to engage the user, bring the new one. And on the other side, they will bring more experience from mobile in terms of how to actually use the data to optimize specific experience, maybe even adjust that experience for the specific type of the user, how to actually make that user experience for the PC and console less linear, and maybe how to adjust it to different context. Yeah, once we have more of this adjustment, then maybe those games will actually get more attention in the emerging markets as well, because they will be more aligned with the user goals in those markets.
Yeah, no, that sums it up very nicely.
Well, he earned his nickname, right?
Oh yeah, the
Brian,
inside guy.
that was what we wanted. We wanted insights from the insights guy, Brian. That's what we got.
We did indeed. We did. So, Marius, before we let you go, we have two questions that we ask everybody who comes onto the podcast to bring it right back down into sort of the world of games. The first is, what are you playing right now? What's exciting you? What's living on your phone or your laptop? And second of all, what's your favourite game of all time?
Oh, those are like two hard questions, actually. Yes, actually, I play a lot of games, testing them. So usually I don't play kind of long time with them, because as you remember, I have 5 children. So if I would play more, then I would not do anything else. Actually, interesting is like my favorite game was in very very old times, when I was playing like I think I played it for the first time, like the game on Atari. It was like the plane, when I was like doing the like flying the plane and doing different challenges. And I think this first experience when you play for the first time and you see, okay, something like that exists, it's very hard to actually combine and actually compare this first experience and this like, okay, this aha moment with something that you have in the in like later, even with much more advanced, much nicer content.
It's true. It's true. It's that gateway drug, isn't it? It's like the first time you get that aha moment and like, oh, this is new. Well, Marius, thank you again. It has been genuinely fascinating, and it's like we're both data geeks, Peggy and I. So perhaps at some point in the near future we can get you back, and we can drill down further and see how everything's changed. Because the one thing I'm sure of is that everything will have changed.
That's definitely a date because we can check, Brian, if his trends were right.
Mhm.
So yes, we will have you back.
Oh, the
Indeed.
challenge is on.
The challenge is on.
Okay. Marius, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was. I hope it was good discussion. It was a really good time.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future.